Hey, this is Dave DeCamp from antiwar.com, and this is anti-war news for Friday, September 16th, 2022. This is the last show of the week. I'll be back after the weekend to catch everybody up. But for now, we got tons of stuff to go over. The first story at the top of antiwar.com today, another weapons package for Ukraine. So on Thursday, the Biden administration announced a new weapons package for Ukraine worth $600 million, bringing the total U.S. military aid pledged to Kiev since Russia invaded on February 24th to $15.1 billion. And that is just in weapons that they've promised to send Ukraine, that mostly that they're shipping directly there. The new package is being sent to Ukraine through the Presidential Drawdown Authority, which gives President Biden the power to send arms to Ukraine directly from U.S. military stockpiles. The White House said it was the 21st time that they pulled from those stockpiles to arm Ukraine. So the package, it's mostly ammunition for weapons that the U.S. has already sent and other kind of smaller equipment. According to the Pentagon, the new package includes additional ammunition for the high mobility artillery rocket systems, that's the HIMARS rocket systems that the U.S. started sending a few months back, 36,000 artillery rounds, 105 millimeter, 1,000 precision guided 155 millimeter artillery rounds. So those are for the howitzers that the U.S. has given Ukraine. It also includes 4 counter artillery radars, 4 trucks, and 8 trailers to transport heavy equipment, counter unmanned aerial systems, mine clearing equipment, Claymore anti personnel munitions, demolition munitions and equipment, small arms, and ammunition, night vision devices, cold weather gear, and other field equipment. So this 600 million is being pulled from the $40 billion Ukraine aid bill that President Biden signed back in May. But those funds are running out, and the Biden administration has asked Congress for more. The administration has requested 13.7 billion in new Ukraine aid. This is supposed to be a short-term package, about 3 months, I think it's supposed to last. And more than half of that amount will go toward spending on weapons. The new request includes 4.5 billion for the Pentagon to replenish stockpiles of weapons that have been sent to Ukraine, 2.7 billion for direct military support for Kiev, and 4.5 billion in economic support for the Ukrainian government. And the remaining 2 billion will go toward energy spending to offset some of the costs of the sanctions on Russia. More weapons seems like just about every week they're announcing new packages. The next one, Russia warns longer range U.S. weapons for Ukraine would cross a red line. So the Russian Foreign Ministry warned the U.S. against providing Ukraine with longer range missiles, saying that doing so would cross a red line and make Washington a party to the conflict. The warning comes after it was revealed that Ukraine has asked the U.S. to provide them with Army tactical missile system. It's a missile that has a range of 190 miles, which is significantly farther than any weapons the U.S. has sent to Ukraine at this point. So Russian Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Maria Zakharova, she said, quote, should Washington decide to supply longer range missiles to Kiev, by doing so, it will cross a red line and become a direct party to the conflict. Under such a scenario, we will be forced to respond appropriately, end quote. So that's a pretty strong warning there. And these missiles these Army tactical missiles, they can be fired from the HIMARS rocket launch systems that the U.S. has already sent Ukraine. So around the time the U.S. first sent the HIMARS, the big question is what kind of missiles would they have? What would the range be? So the U.S. went with the 50-mile missile, which is shorter than others. But there was always this possibility that they could send missiles that could go further, that they could be equipped with longer range missiles, and that's something that could happen here. So Ukraine has requested these weapons. U.S. officials have previously said that they won't send them, but the U.S. has shown, the Biden administration has shown its willingness to escalate support for Ukraine and its involvement in the war, despite the risk of provoking a response. And you see that warning from the Russian Foreign Ministry. I mean, if they go ahead with this missile if they give them these missiles, which would probably be a little further down the line because this was part of a list that Ukraine requested for offensives that they want to launch next year in 2023. But if the U.S. sends these missiles, I mean, we already are relying on Russian restraint. We're relying on Russia not responding um, by, let's say, launching an attack on NATO territory, on like a NATO base or a NATO arms depot that's not in Ukraine or something. Um, not saying that that's something that they will do, but it's certainly a possibility when you look at how intimately involved the U.S. is in this war on Russia's border. Um, and the HIMARS, they were given to Ukraine under the condition that they wouldn't be used to target Russian territory, but that ban doesn't apply to Crimea, and Ukraine is saying that it wants to, really start attacking Crimea, and these longer range missiles with 190 miles would help them do that. All right, the next one here. This is actually from our opinion section from Ray McGovern. It's an analysis on Putin met with Chinese President Xi Jinping on Thursday in Uzbekistan. And Ray's analysis here is really that it shows that China and Russia are continuing to forge stronger ties despite the war in Ukraine. And one thing that he puts in here that I thought was really interesting, I mean, it really shows how China and Russia, in the face of similar pressure from the West, have really stepped up their trade relationship. And this is Putin said this at the meeting. He said that last year, trade between Russia and China grew by 35% to over 140 billion, which is significant. In the first 7 months of this year, he said that it went up another 25%. And he's convinced that in the near term, their annual trade will reach over 200 billion. So it's a lot, and it really shows. China has been stepping up its purchase of Russian oil, and India as well, and that's helping Russia weather the sanctions. And they're making more money on energy now than they were before the war. That's thanks to these purchases from China and India, and also to the higher energy prices too. But it is significant. Next one here, more about the sanctions. This is from Kyle Anzalone at the Libertarian Institute. So the U.S. and the EU will force Turkey to implement sanctions on Russia. Washington and Brussels will pressure Ankara to step up the economic war on Moscow, the Financial Times reported on Thursday. Western officials say that the Russian economy has been able to weather the Washington-led sanctions blitz, partly because the Turkish economy is offering backdoors to Moscow. According to the diplomats, Turkish banks will now be forced to abandon the Russian Mir payment system, which is a system that Russia rolled out a few years ago. It's a card payment system that Russians use. And actually, Kyle links to an article from the Middle East Eye in here that reports that a lot of Russians have traveled to Turkey, and Russians are now reporting, they're saying that their Mir cards are being declined at Turkish hotels and stuff. So that's a sign that this is already happening. And one thing that's concerning about this is that, Erdogan hasn't gone along with NATO in the West in arming Ukraine to the point that other NATO countries are. I mean, they sell them drones and stuff, but it's nothing compared to what the U.S. and the British and the Polish and have done. But because of that, Erdogan has emerged as a broker between Russia and Ukraine, and it's thanks to his diplomacy that grain deal happened. That now we're seeing grain shipped out of Ukraine that wasn't moving before. So if they start enforcing these sanctions really harshly, that could change things. That could give Turkey less pull with Russia. And Turkey also hosted the peace talks at the end of March between Russia and Ukraine, where they apparently were close to a deal. They reached, they were close. They agreed on the outline of a peace deal, and that was done in Turkey. So if they really step up and join in on this economic war against Russia, that might not be able to happen in the future. I just want to take a moment to mention our sponsor, How the West Brought War to Ukraine. It's a great book by Benjamin Oblo about Western provocations, U.S. and NATO provocations against Russia from 1990, from the end of the Cold War until February 24th, the day that Russia invaded Ukraine. And I just wanted to read what Chaz Freeman thinks of the book. He's former Assistant Secretary of Defense, but he's really most well known for his role as being the chief interpreter for Richard Nixon when he traveled to China in 1972. He said, "This is a splendid little book, tautly written, logically organized, easy to read, and persuasive, but appropriately caveated. It is an invaluable primer on the trends and events that produce the escalating warfare in Ukraine. Without understanding the history documented in this book, there will be no de escalation of the US Russian confrontation on Europe's eastern borders." And I think that's a pretty strong sentiment there, that without understanding how we got here, how is it going to end? But you could buy the book on. You'll find the link in the description. It's only $10. I strongly recommend it. It's a short read. It's a quick read, and but it's just packed full of good information and good analysis on the West's role in provoking the war. All right. So speaking of provoking wars, the next one here is about China and Taiwan. China warns that the Taiwan Senate bill will shake the foundation of U.S. China relations. Oh, so I just had to make a correction from my video yesterday. I said that the Senate Armed Services Committee advanced this Taiwan bill, but it was the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, which makes a lot more sense. I don't know why I said Armed Services. That was stupid. But the Senate Foreign Relations Committee advanced it, and that's headed by Bob Menendez. He is a Democrat from New Jersey, and he's very influential. And him and Lindsey Graham introduced this bill. So China on Thursday issued a strong warning over a bill that was advanced by the Senate Foreign Relations Committee that would give Taiwan $6.5 billion in military aid and take other steps to fundamentally change U.S. policy toward Taipei. Chinese Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Mao Ning said that China is firmly opposed to the bill and lodged a complaint to the U.S. over the legislation. She said that the bill seriously breaches the U.S. commitment to the One China policy. So when the U.S. normalized relations with Beijing in the 1970s, Washington agreed that there is one China. They agreed with that premise. There's one China, and that Taiwan is part of that country. And the U.S. recognized Beijing as the government of China and severed diplomatic relations with Taipei in 1979 to formalize the policy. So the reason I thought that this quote is just really says a lot, is that it will shake the foundation of U.S.-China relations, is because this weird situation over Taiwan, which might seem strange to people not that familiar with it, all this weird kind of symbolism, is the foundation of U.S.-China relations. That's what the U.S. had to do to normalize and open up with China. And it's just such a critical part of the relationship, and it's being upended by the U.S. So Mao, the spokeswoman, said, quote, "If the bill continues to be deliberated, pushed forward, or even becomes law, it will greatly shake the political foundation of China-U.S. relations and cause extremely serious consequences to China-U.S. relations and peace and stability across the Taiwan Strait," end quote. So besides the unprecedented military aid for Taiwan, the bill would also give Taiwan the benefit of being a major non-NATO ally without a formal designation. It would expedite arms sales to Taiwan and require sanctions in the event of Chinese aggression. The $6.5 billion will be dispersed over 5 years. So where it's at now, it was passed by the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, and the next step would be a vote in the Senate. Now, I'm guessing it's going to get some pretty strong bipartisan support, but maybe not as close to unanimous as many other bills against China and Russia have, just because there are some people that are going to think this is going too far. As Mitt Romney recognized that it's provocative and bellicose, although he voted in favor of it on the Senate panel. But there's going to be more that I think will vote against it. And something that I thought was pretty concerning is that Chinese analysts told the South China Morning Post that if the legislation becomes law, China would likely respond by increasing the military pressure on Taiwan. as we saw China respond to Nancy Pelosi visiting, simulating a blockade around the island and holding its largest ever military exercises. And the reason why I wanted to highlight this is because the South China Morning Post, they quote these Chinese academics and analysts who have a pretty good idea of how the Chinese government, of what they're thinking and what they might do. I remember right before Pelosi went, they quoted some analysts who said China's going to start flying planes over the median line that separates the Taiwan Strait. It's going to become a regular thing if she goes. She goes, it becomes a regular thing. They do it. They've been doing it every day. So now this Li Fei, the director of Xiamen University of research centers there, told the South China Morning Post that China's response will become more intense as the U.S. steps up its support for Taiwan. He said, quote, "The more the U.S. provokes, the more intense China will respond, such as deploying aircraft over Taiwan, further strengthening and extending military blockades and drills, and even blocking Taiwan by declaring the Taiwan Strait as our continental body of water and banning vessels from entry," end quote. So that would be a major deal if China blocked the Taiwan Strait. I'm not saying that that's what they would do, and I would doubt that they would go that far kind of right away if this bill passes and becomes law. But just to see that that's something that is being floated as a possible response from what I think is a pretty good source is very concerning, and it shows what we're dealing with here and what these people are messing with. These people in Congress. All right, the next one here, President Biden signs an executive order to limit foreign investments in U.S. technology in a move aimed at China. So Biden signed an executive order, and it directs the Committee on Foreign Investments in the United States to increase scrutiny on certain foreign investments in technology. And this committee was formed in 1975, and its major role up until now really is they review like if a foreign government or a foreign entity is going to become a major stakeholder in a U.S. company and is going to take over that company, and they'll review it for national security risks. So if like a Chinese company was going to buy a U.S. defense contractor, they would probably block it. But so now they're kind of getting more authority with this executive order, which is meant to give the federal government more power over the economy to block more foreign investments if they want to. It's going to focus on critical technologies like semiconductors, quantum technologies, biotechnology, artificial intelligence, things like that. And it will also focus on deals that could give a foreign company access to personal data, Americans' personal data. And the video sharing app TikTok has come under scrutiny because some of their data is stored by a Chinese-based company, ByteDance. That's the parent company of TikTok. So the allegation is that because ByteDance is a Chinese company, it's obliged to share user data with the Chinese government if they want it. But TikTok denies that. They say it's protected, and ByteDance has said that it has taken steps to protect users' data. The Trump administration, if you remember, tried to ban TikTok. That failed, and then they tried to broker a deal to have TikTok purchased by a US-based company, but that also failed. So of all the things that TikTok is accused of, we know that US tech companies are guilty of it, but with respect to the US government. Thanks to the Edward Snowden leaks that were revealed in 2013, it revealed that there's a program known as PRISM that gives the NSA and the FBI backdoor access to user data from Facebook, Google, Apple, Microsoft, and other US tech platforms. So we know that our government has backdoor access to all this stuff that we use. And what's interesting is that one of the companies that the Trump administration was trying to get to purchase TikTok was Microsoft. So theoretically, if Microsoft bought TikTok and that data was stored by them, the US would have a backdoor to it. They would get that data back in the USA so they could spy on us some more. But yeah, I just thought that you always got a point. I always have to point that out when I'm discussing this issue. And the Biden administration, they're also reportedly considering to take actions against U.S. investments in China, and they might also take action against TikTok, according to some other reports. All right, the next one here. Israel's Gantz says that the Iran nuclear deal is in the ER room. So Israeli Defense Minister Benny Gantz said this on Thursday, that the deal is in the ER room and that it's likely not going to happen. He said that there's a period potentially after the U.S. midterm elections that something could happen, but I don't think he's too concerned. It seems like the deal is dead. It seems like Israel's pressure to make the U.S. harden its stance in negotiations has worked. Earlier this week, Secretary of State Antony Blinken said that an agreement with Iran was unlikely. And so that's just where we're at. And in more news related to that, the Wall Street Journal reported that the Biden administration is considering adding even more sanctions on Iran, which would not send the best signal to the Iranians. But with being stuck in this deal, Iran is looking for alternatives, and one thing is expanding trade with Russia and China and other countries. So Iran's Raisi, this is the next story, Ebrahim Raisi, that's the president, he told Putin on Thursday that cooperation makes U.S. sanctioned countries stronger. So Raisi said this in Uzbekistan during a summit of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the SCO. He told Putin, quote, the relationship between countries that are sanctioned by the U.S., such as Iran, Russia, or other countries, can overcome many problems and issues and make them stronger. The Americans think whichever country they impose sanctions on, it will be stopped. Their perception is a wrong one, end quote. So Iran also on Thursday, they signed a memorandum to become a permanent member of this SCO, which is a Central Asian security and economic bloc aimed at countering Western influence in the region. Its permanent members include Russia, China, India, Pakistan, Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, and Tajikistan. Facing similar pressure from the West, Russia, China, and Iran have forged closer ties in recent years. And Tehran is looking to increase trade with countries in the SCO as it remains under heavy sanctions and is isolated from the U.S.-led global financial system. So it's just more cooperation between these countries, and the U.S. has pushed them all together with their sanctions. I mean, I can't imagine that this was very easy to predict that these countries would forge stronger ties and move closer together. And it's just a result of U.S. policy. All right, the next one here, just a quick one. This is a story from AP that just says the ceasefire between Armenia and Azerbaijan has been holding as of early Friday, late Thursday in that region. So hopefully it sticks. The death toll is up to 176 soldiers on both sides. Hopefully that there's not another flare up there. And then the last news story here, this is from Kyle Anzalone and Will Porter. The White House approves over $1 billion in military aid to Egypt despite human rights abuses. So the White House on Wednesday announced that it would send over $1 billion in security assistance to Egypt. The Biden administration approved the aid as several top Democratic lawmakers pushed to reduce security assistance for Egypt by $300 million. While Egyptian military dictator Abdel Fattah el-Sisi's government is credibly accused of severe human rights abuses, Cairo is the third largest recipient of U.S. aid. Washington sends military aid to Egypt to bribe the government in Cairo to adopt policies favorable toward Israel. So this is something that's interesting because I didn't realize it really until Kyle and Will wrote this up, is that this goes back to the Camp David Accords. And really all this military aid for Egypt was like a bribe not to attack Israel. And that's a situation that wouldn't happen today, but they're still one of the top recipients of military aid. So they get 1.3 billion each year. And because of Sisi's human rights abuses, mainly the persecution of political opponents and stuff, the Gregory Meeks, he led this. He's a Democrat in the House from New York. He led this charge. He said, cut the aid by $300 million. And the Biden administration said, we'll give you $130 million off the top. So that is just a fraction of the $1.3 billion that Egypt gets each year. And the same thing happened last year. I think it was the same numbers too. They said cut it by $300 million, and it was $130 that they cut. But this shows how significant that Taiwan bill is, because that's $6.5 billion over 5 years. So that will put them up in the right up where Egypt is in terms of military aid, and Egypt is third now because Ukraine has become top, and then you got Israel 3.8 billion each year, and then Egypt 1.3 billion. So Taiwan, I can't figure out the math right now, but 6.5 billion divided by 5, 1 point something, that's going to put them up there, and that's how huge that piece of legislation is. Um, Oh, there's one more here. This is from Connor Freeman at the Libertarian Institute. The majority of the IAEA Board of Governors supports Western statement against Iran. So the Board of Governors is the 35 nations that are a party to the IAEA, and they 2/3 of them back the U.S. statement on Iran, basically pressing Tehran to explain why about the traces of uranium found at undeclared Iranian nuclear sites that the IAEA has this inquiry in, and Iran wants them to close it. They said that they've explained it, but they haven't been happy with their explanation, and that is a potential issue, part of the issue why the nuclear deal isn't being revived. But that's it for the news for today and for the week. I'll be back after the weekend. You guys can contact us at news@antiwar.com. You can support the show, antiwar.com/donate. You can buy some merch, buy some nice t-shirts. You'll find the link in the description. You follow me on Twitter, subscribe to the YouTube channel, and like all the videos that you see. If you listen on the podcast, you could still subscribe on the YouTube channel just to pump those numbers up. Also, if you're watching on YouTube or Odyssey, um, you know, there's an audio version that it's on all the podcast apps if you want to listen to it, if you want to consume it that way. But that's it. And I'll catch you guys after the weekend. Thanks for listening.